So today we're going to talk about circle graphs. So a circle graph is a graph that displays data as part of a whole. In a circle graph, the percents add up to 100 since the entire circle represents the whole. And you learn that one whole is 100%. The data represented in a circle graph can be used to solve problems including part-to-whole comparisons and equivalence. So the word equivalence means equal parts. So we're going to use this little circle graph that talks about vegetable garden plants for now. And we're going to answer various types of questions. So it says the circle graph shows the percent of vegetables planted in a vegetable garden. There are 200 vegetable plants in all. So this entire garden, 100% of the garden, represents 200 plants. So 32% of the 200 plants are tomatoes, 36% of the 200 plants are corn, 12% of the 200 vegetables are green beans, 9% of the 200 vegetables is cucumbers, and 11% of the 200 vegetables is just peppers. So we're going to determine how many plants we're actually talking about in each section out of that 200. Then we're going to use that information to answer these 5 questions. So we have how many of the vegetables are green beans, how many of the vegetable plants are either cucumbers or peppers, what fraction of the total number of plants are corn plants, expressed as in simplest form because it says a fraction, how many more tomato plants are in the garden than green beans, and then write a ratio that compares the part of the plants that are cucumbers to the part of the plants that are corn. Express this ratio as a fraction, decimal, and a percent. Then interpret the ratio's meaning. So the first thing I need to do is I need to determine how many out of each of these sections represents the tomatoes? How many are corn? How many are green bean? How many are cucumbers? How many are peppers? So in order to do that, I created a table. And I just replicated the circle graph over here so it's easier for me to use. So it says tomatoes are 32%, corn is 36%, green bean is 12%, cucumbers is 9%, and peppers is 11%. I'm going to convert these percents into decimals. In order to go from a percent to a decimal, if my marker wants to work, all you're going to do is you're going to move that decimal 2 places to the left, or you're just going to divide by 100. So you're going to take the percent and divide it by 100. And when you divide it by 100, you're moving 2 places that direction because of both of those zeros. So if I do 32 divided by 100, or I write 32 hundredths, this already tells me what my decimal is. It's 32 hundredths. So I'm going to put 0.32. And then this is 36 hundredths. So I would put a 36 here. 36 divided by 100 is 36 hundredths. And then I put a 12 divided by 100. 12 divided by 100 is 12 hundredths. And then I'm going to put a 9. So 9 divided by 100 is 9 hundredths. So that's 0.09. And then 11% divided by 100 is 11 hundredths. So 0.11. Another thing you can do is you can think of the word percent. So the word per means 1, and we're talking about cents. So we're really talking about pennies. 1 cent. So if I have 32 pennies, I have 32 cents. If I have 36 pennies, I have 36 cents. If I have 12 pennies, I have 12 cents. If I have 9 pennies, I have 9 cents. And if I have 11 pennies, I have 11 cents. That is all I have to do. Then that's my percent to decimal. Now, this is percent of the 200. So that word of right there means that I need to multiply. So I'm going to multiply 0.32 of the 200. You have to make sure it's a decimal before you do the multiplying though. So we're going to do 200 times 32 hundredths. So I can do that over here. Because there are 2 decimal places in this number right here, my answer has to have 2 decimal places. So I have 0, 0, 4, done with the 2, drop a 0. 3 times 0, 3 times 0, and 3 times 2. And then 2 decimal places. So we're talking about 64. So 64 tomato plants. So this little section right here represents 64 of the 200. So 64 out of 200 of them are tomato plants. 64 out of 200. And if I simplify that, and I divide them both by 2, I get the 32 out of 100. Or I can go farther down and simplify it even more. We'll do that in a little bit. So same thing here. So now you're going to do 0.36 of the 200. So I'm going to do 200 times 0.36. 0, 0, 6 times 2 is 12, 0, because I'm done with the 6. 3 times 0 is 0, 3 times 0 is 0, 3 times 2 is 6. 0, 0, 2, and 7, 2 decimal places, so that's talking about 72. So 72 of the plants are corn plants. And I'm going to do the same thing for 12. So 0.12 times 200. Now, here's a little treat, a trick really. 12 times 2 is 24. And then I can put those 2 zeros onto the end, and then I need 2 decimal places, so 1, 2. So that's 24. 0.09 times 200. 9 times 2 is 18. Put the 2 zeros on the end behind it. The one in the front doesn't matter. 2 decimal places, so we're talking about 18. Ignoring the zeros, 11 times 2 is 22. Put the 2 zeros back on the end and then 2 decimal places. So that's 22. If I add all of these numbers up together, I should get 200. And if I add all of these numbers up together, I'm going to get 100. So 2, 8, 10, 19, 20. So 0, carry a 2, 2, 5, 8, 9, 10. So that's 100%. Now I'm going to add these numbers up, and that should give me that 200 because it would be 100% of the 200 plants we found. 4, 6, 10, 18, 20, 0, carry a 2. 8, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So I checked to make sure that it came out to 200. If this number doesn't come out to 200, that means something here was wrong. All right, so now we have our table. So tomato plants, there are 64 tomato plants, 72 corn plants, 24 green beans. We have 18 cucumbers, and we have 22 peppers. So now I can answer my questions. So the very first question said, how many vegetable plants are green beans? 24. Easy. How many vegetable plants are either cucumbers or peppers? So now I'm talking about these two down here. So now I need to do is just add these two together. So there are 18 cucumbers and 22 peppers. So there are either 40 cucumbers or peppers. What fraction of the total of plants are corn plants? Express this as a fraction in simplest form. So now it's 72 out of 200. If I divide both of those by 2, I'm going to get 36 over 100. If I divide both of those by 2, I'm going to get 18 over 50. And if I divide both of those by 2, I'm going to get 9 over 25. So my answer is 9/25. Okay, so the next question says, how many more plants are in the garden that are green beans? How many more tomato plants are in the garden than green beans? So my tomato plants and my green beans. In other words, how many more mean to subtract? So I'm subtracting my tomato plants and I'm subtracting my green beans. 4 minus 4 is 0. 6 minus 2 is 4. So there are 40 more tomato plants than there are green bean plants. And the very last one says to write a ratio that compares the part of the plants that are cucumbers to the part that are corn. So we're going to do cucumbers to corn. Remember that you can write a ratio using the word to. You can write a ratio using your little semicolons, or you can write a ratio as a fraction. That is completely up to you. So it says write a ratio that compares the plants that are cucumbers to the part of the plants that are corn. Express the ratio as a fraction, a decimal, and a percent. So I'm going to go ahead and write it as a fraction first. Cucumbers to corn. So there are 18 cucumbers and 64 corns. So there's 18 to 64. I'm going to simplify this. Divide both by 2, we get 9 over 32. And then as a decimal, if I divide 18 by 64, so I'm going to go top in, bottom out. Or let me use the smaller numbers. I'm going to use 9 and 32 since I simplified my ratio. Top in, bottom out, circle, circle, dot, dot. Now we have a decimal spot. And the reason I'm adding decimals and zeros is because the number on the outside is bigger than the number on the inside, which means that I'm going to get a decimal for my answer. If I have 9, I cannot make a group of 32. If I have 90, I can make 2 groups of 32, which is 64. Then I'm going to simplify. 10 minus 4 is 6. 8 minus 6 is 2. And I'm going to bring down that 0. So now I have 260. So I know that 32 times 10 is 320. And half of 320 is 160. So I need to go a little bit between 5 and 10. So I'm going to try 8 and see what happens. So it's 6 and a 1, 24, 25, 256. Ooh, I am so close. So we have 256. I'm going to subtract. 60 minus 56 is 4. I'm going to bring down another 0. Then I'm going to make this a 1. So most of our answers round to the nearest hundred. So in this instance, we're going to round to the nearest hundred just to help us out. So this 1 cannot change that 8. So our answer would be 0.28. And then to turn a decimal into a percent, all you have to do is multiply by 100, or simply move that decimal 2 places to the right. Or if we think about 28 cents, it takes 28 pennies to make 28 cents, and the word percent means 1 cent. So that's how you go from a fraction or a ratio simplified to a decimal and to a percent. And that's how you answer all of those questions. Make sure that you take the information from the circle graph, convert it over into the whole numbers that's part out of the whole that it gives you.